What's up, YouTube? I got a lot of you guys asking me about the content inside the Conscious Poker Pro Membership Program. And so I decided to do something unique today, and I'm going to share with you guys a video from our Pro Membership Program. This is some of our better strategy content. It's a little bit more in depth for those people that are looking for the next level in their poker game. If you want access to a group of like-minded people all working together to improve their poker game, that are part of a private forum, monitored by a Conscious Poker coach and myself, so you get feedback on questions you have and hands that you need reviewed, or questions you have about poker, bankroll management, poker lifestyle, whatever it may be. This is a great place to join. It's also some of our better in-depth strategy videos that are more advanced, as well as monthly group coaching and a chance to get your questions answered by me on a group coaching call every month, as well as priority access to getting your hands submitted and reviewed by myself and a Conscious Poker coach. So that's the essence of our Pro Membership Program. If you want more information or would like to join, you could click the link below. And today's video is really a teaser about a video from our Pro Membership Program to show you the style of video you're going to see, a little bit longer, a little bit more advanced, and I hope you enjoy this stuff. And if you have questions about the program, leave them here in the comments below, and I'm happy to answer them as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the inside.
Hand of the day.
Now let's jump into this hand. First off, let me set the stage. We're playing in the EPT Sochi, so a huge EPT event, in the money, and we have 30 big blinds. So this might be a unique hand because ranges generally change when we're playing in high stakes tournaments. The range of hands that your opponent's gonna have in the money, deep in an EPT, is generally, and again, this is generally, going to be narrower than the range of hands they're going to have in level 1 of a $200 buy-in tournament at your local casino. The reason being is that these players are invested. They've been playing for 3 or 4 days to get to this point, and they're also in a very high-stakes tournament, likely the biggest one of their career, in the money in an event, and they're not just going to be blowing their money away. So the ranges are going to be narrower. So for this hand, we're going to do a little bit more of exploitative style of play given the live read and situation that we have. And if you're ever in this spot deep in a major tournament, you're going to find that this is generally how the play is. Now, this this doesn't always apply. If you're playing against a very good high stakes reg who plays tons of tournaments and they're always finding themselves deep in an event, they're going to have a balanced range. They're going to put you to tough decisions with marginal hands. Their range may be wider. If you're playing against a complete maniac or someone that's just going bonkers, or a massive fish with a huge chip lead, his range might be wider as well. In this hand, what is unique is we don't really know exactly who our opponent is. One thing we do know, though, is that his stack is way, way bigger than ours. When you have stack leverage in a tournament, people generally play looser, meaning they play a little bit more aggressively because they can bust you, but you can't bust them. So we're going to have to use a balance of the fact that we're deep in a tournament, meaning people are going to play tighter, and the fact that we're up against the chip leader, which means he's liable to be a little bit more aggressive and play looser. So with that said, when I do the analysis in this hand, I'm going to do it based on an overall strategy that's pretty balanced and reasonable, and you could adjust from there based on your opponent, the specific game, the tournament you're playing, and all the variables you know about the situation. Without further ado, let's jump into the hand of the day. We find ourselves in this hand under the gun. We get dealt king-queen suited, which is a great hand. Now let's pretend we don't know what our villain has, because we realistically aren't going to be able to see his cards. We make it 12,000, which is a very standard 2.2, 2.5x open. Calls on the button, villain calls in the small blind, and we go 3 ways to the flop. Flop comes down king 8-3 rainbow, queen 8-3 with a flush draw, small blind checks, we bet 17K, which is a third of the pot, and now he opts to check raise to 42,000. So here we have a tough decision. Generally in this spot, we're going to have one of the best hands that we can have. This is definitely the top of our range. Of course, we could have 3 kings, pocket 8s, ace king, or aces, but most of our range in this spot is going to be bluffs. We're going to have hands like 10-9 suited, jack-10, ace-5 suited, and maybe some bluffs that we raised pre-flop with like 7-6 suited. And again, most of those aren't going to be clubs. We're only going to have clubs 1 out of 4 times. So we have a way too strong of a hand to fold here, and also because if you think about it, we bet such a small amount on the flop that we gave incentive to the villain to check raise. Had we bet something like 35,000 and he went all in, his range is going to be a lot stronger because he's basically risking more to win less. He's committing all his money to the pot. He has to have something. We're still going to be getting a good price and we're probably going to still have to call it off, but there aren't any complete stone bluffs in his range. He's not going to have something like ace queen of diamonds if we bet the flop and he just jams. He's probably just going to fold that hand on the flop if we bet the pot size of the pot. But when we bet a third of the pot, he could basically risk one pot size bet or less and put us to a decision for all of our chips. Remember, he has what's called stack leverage here, meaning he could risk a third of our stack and we have to either commit all into the pot or fold. So he's in a great position to apply leverage in this spot, even if he's bluffing. We realistically can't continue on this flop without a king or a flush draw, which means a lot of our betting range on the flop is going to have to fold. So he's going to get us to fold a lot of our bluffs, and because we bet a third of the pot, we're going to keep all of our bluffs in our range. We're going to be bluffing this flop 100% of the time, given our bet size, if we have a bluff. All this is to say it's a good spot for the villain to raise with some sort of bluff type hand. Not all of his bluffs are going to raise. He's not going to just have any two cards any percent of the time, but a bluff that has some backdoor equity if we call, or some part of his range that is going to bluff to be balanced. Something like queen jack of diamonds could be a bluff that he can have that condenses his range well enough that he's not bluffing too often. He's also going to have maybe worse kings for value, maybe something like king jack, king 10 suited. And he also might have flush draws. Any flush draw here is definitely going to be raising. He's not risking his entire stack. So if he does have something like 10-9 suited, he's definitely liable to get it in on this board just because he can afford to gamble and we really can't. All this is to say our hand is definitely too strong to fold. And the question is, what do we want to do? Here's where I'd like you to think about one more variable other than just your direct equity. In a cash game, you're definitely going to call here. You're going to want to call to have a balanced range. You're probably going to allow your opponent to keep his range wider, keep his bluffs in the pot, and then just call it off on the turn no matter what comes. This is a good strategy in a cash game because you're not really worried about getting all the money in so long as you're a favorite. In a tournament though, the situation is different. And the reason is, if your opponent has something like queen jack of diamonds, you don't really necessarily want a 9 of diamonds to roll off on the turn and have him shove. Now he's in a spot where he has 12 outs with 1 to go, and sure, you're a favorite, but you're putting in half the pot on the turn, and he has 25% equity. He's not losing that much money by putting you all in, and you really don't want to gamble. You don't want to be in a spot where he has something like ace queen of diamonds, turns a lot of equity, or turns an ace, or turns a free equity, and puts you all in, and now you're gambling for your whole stack. So what I'd much rather see here than a flat call, which is what we ended up doing, is just a jam. Jam it all in, and if he has you beat, you're going to lose all your money anyway. It's not important if he has you beat because you're going to call it all in on the turn pretty much regardless, and so the times you're beat, it's no big deal. But the times he has no equity, you're not letting him gamble with you on the turn. You also have to consider, if you call this flop, it's not like he's going to shove with a stone bluff on the turn. If he has something like 9-10 of diamonds and the turn is a deuce, he's not going to shove. You have less than a half pot size bet left, he's just going to check fold. So you're not winning any more money from him unless he turns a massive draw, at which point you're putting yourself in considerable risk for busting when you can bust the tournament and he can't. Now, if the situation was reversed and you had 5x his chip stack, sure, you can afford to gamble a little bit and call the flop, hoping that he picks up some draw and jams it in on the turn, or hoping he goes wild with a bluff because you can afford to lose that money. In this spot, in this tournament, deep in the event, when ICM is at play and when we're in the money, I'm just going to jam it all in here, protect my hand, and if he has a worse king, he's going to call. If he has a flush draw, he's probably going to call it off, but at least I'm protecting myself. Now, the one case for calling that I didn't mention that you might want to consider is if you do just call and the turn comes a club and he jams, you can probably fold profitably. Other than that, I don't really see a reason for calling, which is what we ended up doing. We call the turn, we call the flop, we go heads up to the turn. So the turn comes here, a jack of hearts, and now he jams, and we have to think about what to do. Now the first thing I want you to think about here right away is what price do I need to justify calling? The pot's 125K, he jams basically effectively 100K. So the pot's 225 and we're calling 90 or 100 to win 225. We're getting 2.25 to 1, which means we need to be right 1 out of 3, 1 out of 3.5 times. So we need 1 out of 3 is 25%, 1 out of 4 is 20%, so we need somewhere in between that amount of equity. Let's say we need 22% equity to justify calling here. Now remember, this is if we're playing a cash game and the only thing to consider is our equity. But in a tournament, we're going to want to make sure that we have significantly more equity than the pot odds we're getting, because of the fact that if we bust this hand, our chip stack goes to 0, but if we double up, our chip value doesn't double. So we always need to be more conservative in a tournament and make sure there's an overlay between the price we're getting and the equity that we have. So if we need 22% here, hypothetically, to justify calling, I would like to make sure that in this spot, we have at least 35, 40% equity to justify calling here. Let's jump into Poker Cruncher and take a look at what the math says. Before we go any further, I want to say I got the math wrong in the last segment. I don't know what I was thinking. The pot's 225, we need to call 90. So we need roughly 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 3.5. We need to have 25, 30% equity. So I wasn't on the wrong side of the equation. Anyway, I apologize. We need to have roughly 25 or 30% equity, which means we need to be more than that. We need to have more than that. So the equity we need is still about the same. It's about 40% to make this a profitable call, but I got the equation wrong and I apologize. Anyway, let's go to the situation and see exactly what types of hands our opponent could have. Now, this is a really tough spot. Again, what types of hands he can have specifically is a subject for endless debate. I ultimately don't know anything about this opponent. I do know that it's deep in a major tournament, so his range is going to be wider, but I also know that he's the chip leader and he has stack leverage, which means his range might be a little bit wider. So using that combination of both, I'm just going to give him a standard range of hands, not really knowing too much about how he plays preflop. Ultimately, how he plays preflop will be a big determining factor into the types of hands he can have on the turn, because does he call preflop with 7-6 of clubs? I don't know. But if he does, his range is a lot wider than a player who doesn't call preflop with that. My inclination is to think he's deep, he's in the small blind, he's getting a good price, there's another caller, his range is liable to be a little bit wider than the average player because of his preflop situation. So here I gave my opponent a range. You can see the hands that I highlighted in green and yellow are the types of hands he can have. He can have pocket 3s, pocket 8s, king queen, king jack suited, and those are the hands that beat us. That's basically it. So we're beat by those hands. But then the hands that don't beat us, like all the ace high flush draws and some queen high flush draws, jack high flush draws, 10 high flush draws, those hands have a lot of equity. So when you enter that into the calculator, you're gonna see that he has something like 40, we have 47% equity. Now this is being very conservative. I didn't give him hands that he can very well have, like queen 9 of clubs or 10-9 of diamonds. Maybe he has something like that. Maybe he has ace queen of diamonds. I gave him no crazy bluffs. This was the bare minimum, strongest range that he can have. So this is something that's going to apply versus every opponent you play against or better. In other words, if your opponent can have wider ranges of hands on the flop or pre-flop, something like 7-6 of clubs or ace queen of diamonds on the flop, then your equity is going to be higher, meaning it's even more of a profitable call. Even with this very narrow equity, you can see here that we have 47% equity. Now, if you compare that to the equity we needed, which is 28%, I just don't think we can fold here. I'm all about giving up equity in a tournament to wait for a better spot, especially when ICM is at play and we're deep in the tournament. That is basic tournament strategy. But giving up literally a double in the amount of equity that you need is just too much to do, especially when folding would leave us with less than 20 big blinds, under the gun, about to pay the blinds again. I just don't see that we can fold here and get away from our hand. It's just too tough. As played, we ended up calling this spot. He had a set of 8s like you saw. We were drawing dead. We busted the tournament. That's life. What I want you to be focused on, though, is not the results, but the process. How do we make good decisions in spite of the evidence, in spite of what our opponent ends up having? The results aren't important. What's important is the process. Go through this process and you will improve. I hope you enjoyed this hand. If you have hands you'd like to send to me, please send them to alec@consciouspoker.com, or simply let me know you're a pro member as well so I give you guys priority access to reviewing your hands, or simply submit them on Slack and I'll pick the best ones and review them here in future videos. Thank you guys so much for being pro members, and I'll see you guys more on the Slack channels. If you guys are interested in joining, click the link below. If you have questions, leave them here on the YouTube. I will do my best to get back to you guys and answer them. I'm really looking forward to see you guys on the inside. This is definitely what I believe is the best place to learn poker on the internet, the best value for what you're spending. You get access to me, coaching, monthly group coaching, a conscious poker coach to answer your questions. I think it's really awesome stuff. Ton of people in there that are really benefiting from the program. Looking forward to see you guys on the inside, and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Cheers.